So, been hearing some incredible stories about companies, and there are equal number of stories in the audience, and so you're all very focused on the here and now. What I'm going to talk about is something that probably isn't on your radar, but I want to suggest it should be. I was trying to think this morning about how to make it relevant, and I was looking out at the room, all 100 people starting companies. I want to present you with an image. What if you're here, you're an elder, and you're looking out on a group like this, and the group is 3 generations of your own family. You've produced next generation people who are entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, giving back to the community, sustainability, business energy. Just imagine that. And so the question that needs to come up, maybe not front burner, but needs to come up in your life is what is, you've created wealth as part of your entrepreneurship. Are you going to plow it all back into the business? Probably you're also, some is going to go back to your family and to your next generation. And the question is, what do you want to do with that wealth? How is it going to make a difference in your family and in your life? Another question that comes up, and a lot of people ask is what am I going to give my children? There's this fear that somehow having wealth, on the one hand, it's wonderful, and we've done all this work to give to our children. On the other hand, will it spoil them? And so people are asking, coming to experts, financial planners, estate planners, to create a plan for the future. And I want to suggest in this talk that that they may be asking the wrong question, that wealth is not something that's kind of like a poison that has to be fed in an IV to your children in little bits of at a time. It really, you have to think of it differently, that wealth, as I've talked to people, is a sense of possibility. It's a sense of all of infinite number of things that people can do, and the challenge is to use that energy to energize your family the way you've energized your companies. So that's different than creating a trust estate plan. What will be my legacy? What will you give to the future? You all have a wonderful legacy in your companies, and that's there. But also, as parents, you're looking ahead to the next generation, grandchildren. How are you going to use the success that you've had to make a difference for them? So my passion at this stage of life has been to look and travel around the world and to talk to families that have been successful in creating a business and then often turning that business into great wealth and then producing impact in the world. These are the large global families. I've now been around the world, interviewed about 80 of them, members of the older and the younger generation. And what I've been trying to do is to learn what they've done, to tap their wisdom in order to help other families not just create a great business, make a lot of wealth, and then have the second generation spend it, but rather, how are they continuing that energy across the generations? So the thing that I've been finding, and the experience that I've had, is that there are some commonalities in these families over 2 or 3 generations, 20 countries, every industry that you can imagine. The families have stayed together. Half of them have sold the legacy business, and half of them still own it, but they've diversified into other areas. They have family foundations. They have different efforts that they do. And the challenge that they're facing is, how do they continue that into the next generation? One of the biggest findings that I find, and this is something that we look back and we can see this started in the first and second generation. Sometimes it didn't start in the founding generation. It started with your children saying, well, these are things you have to listen to and think about, and they're not things that may be on your radar. Each of these families made a second decision after they had made wealth and were successful, and that decision was, we are going to create a great family that stays connected, that has a set of values and sees that by the success that they've created, They can implement those values much more successfully together than to have everybody go out. And they create wealth over generations, but they also create other kinds of capital: social capital, family capital, human capital. They create all kinds of value in addition to the wealth. So let's start with you. And one of the things that I have discovered is that the entrepreneur is a very interesting figure. This is a person, and it's not male. Look around the room here. Males, females, but they have a similar personality. They're very intuitive. They take action. They don't sit around, listen. They improvise. They seek opportunities. And these are great people, and all of you represent the fruits of that. Now, the challenge is that as an entrepreneur, those skills may not be the best skills to develop and nurture the next generation. The next generation, the downside of being an entrepreneur is you tend to live in a bubble. The bubble is the wonderful creation village that you've created in your community. You never get the real story, and this may be true not just in your company, but also in your family. Letting go of control. There's books and things written. We hear about entrepreneurs in their 80s, 90s. How can they let go of control and allow the next generation to do things? And they have difficulty trusting and sharing. So families say, well, should we tell our children that we're wealthy? And I always say, well, what is it that you think they think? Where do they live? And often the problem is not telling your kids that you're wealthy, but the problem is that how does a child that grows up in the household and everything is shared get the idea that it's not their money, it's your money? And then how does the family work together to say, what is it that we're going to create? So what I've learned talking to the next generation family members is that following a successful entrepreneur is not easy. And being in a family that has a lot of wealth, and some of us have come from modest circumstances, and we look at it, I want to give everything that I never had to my children. I want to provide a wonderful life, great schools, education. But with that comes the challenge that young people, first of all, their parents are incredibly successful. So some of the next generation people in the family say to me, well, gee, I don't want to be the first one in the family to make a mistake. Now, with that attitude, how are they going to be entrepreneurial? How are they going to be expansive if they're trying to avoid mistakes? My own son, who's now 40, very successful, was talking to me one day when he was in college, and he said, well, gee, Dad, how do I deal with the fact that everything in my life has been good? Everything's been comfortable, everything has happened, everything has been great. How do I learn to deal with adversity? And it was like, well, maybe you should go out and learn that. So the challenge that you have to face, and this is a challenge that we see not just in ourselves, but in the service industries, the legal industry, the financial industry, the tendency is what we call to act in a paternalistic way. Now, it comes from parents. Paternalism is when you look at your children and you say, well, gee, I have to make decisions for you because you're not ready. I'm doing this for your own good. I love you and I care for you, but I know more what you want, and you'll thank me later. So that's paternalism. And what happens is that attitude is reflected in the financial industry, where people make up trusts, and they say the trust has all kinds of rules and limits, and you can't do this, you can't do that, and you can only do this. And what happens to people when they grow up? When do you have a ceremony in your family to say, we're suspending paternalism, and now you're on your own, you make decisions? And what you find is that a lot of the trusts and a lot of the things that are created in families have not a positive effect, but they have what we call they create the Samaritan's dilemma, which is, with all these trusts and with all these things, you end up with the kids who are passive and withdrawn. They say to me things like, well, there's nothing I can do because of the trust and everything, so why should I try to do anything? Now, in the families that I've been looking at, one of the things that we see is that the idea of teaching values is not something that starts when you meet with your estate planner, when your kids are in college, and you're setting up a next generation trust. That values is something that's learned as the family, as your kids are growing up. Every day, that people talk about how the most important teaching time between you and your kids is in the car, when you pick them up from school, when you pick them up from going to a party or doing something together as a family. One thing, these are teachable moments. My son was about 8, and it was great when we were coming from a fabulous party in Silicon Valley, a friend of his, and there were pools and grounds and servants, and we're driving back, and my son says, "I hate our house." We live in a city house. Let's say it doesn't have acres and acres of land, but it's a very nice house in San Francisco. What do you hate? Well, we don't have this and we don't have that. And so this is something you can say, shut up, you should have some gratitude, a lot of people are poorer, all those kinds of cliches. But we use it as an opportunity to say, well, how do you think your friend has a house like this? What is it? What's behind that? We talked about city houses and country houses and why people like to live close together rather than in giant. We had all kinds of interesting discussions because we took the opportunity to take seriously what he was saying. Now, one of the things that I've seen in the stories of next generation families is that there's a journey in the next generation, and it starts with the family being together when the kids are young, doing service, learning, vacationing, having experiences together. But then the family has to create, and this is, somebody mentioned the hero's journey. There's a kind of a hero's journey in every next generation where now they have to go out, even though they've lived in a palace and they've had a wonderful life and everything. Now they have to go out and they have to meet people and make decisions. And so the family has to learn how to let go and let them be on their own. So looking at family wealth in the next generation, there are ways in which they say, well, go out. You're getting a wonderful education, but now it's time to work and to get a job or to do social service. So they individuate. And then after they've done that and after they've developed skills and a sense of confidence in themselves, then you can begin to talk about maybe entering the family business, maybe being part of if the family has an investment group or does things together, maybe reconnecting in another way with the family. And in order to do that, the older generation has to let go and has to know how to let go and trust the next generation rather than just do everything for them. Now, in my research, I'm looking at what do they do in the next generation, and there are some things that I've learned that people do in large families, and I've been looking at them and saying, well, these are also things that apply to a first, second generation new wealth, where you're beginning to talk about what's next in your family. So the first thing that families do in these successful families is they get together as a family and they talk. And families just are designed to avoid issues. If people fight all the time, they tend to withdraw from each other. If there's a tough issue like so-and-so is doing something that we don't approve of, there's a way to avoid that. And the generative families, successful families, get together as a family and talk. So when people say, I don't know how much to give my kids and what to do with my wealth, the first question I said, well, have you talked to them? And people, have the idea, well, let's get together and make our estate plan, and then in 5 or 10 years or sometime in the future, we'll get together and talk about it. But there isn't engagement about what do we want? What do we want to see? And therefore, they never get the good parts and the energy. The second thing that these families talk about is transparency. And not necessarily giving them big balance sheets of how much wealth you have and what your investments are, but just talking generally about what do we want to see in the next generation. What's it going to look like? What is it that you want to do in your life, and what could we do to help you with that, with the dreams and the goals that you have? Third thing is, for a family that wants to stay together, is creating an opportunity. You've created a business. The idea that the business is continually entrepreneurial means that the next generation might have an opportunity to come in to a business and make a contribution to something that they will eventually have share ownership. So there's a sense of opportunity and a sense of recruiting your kids to be involved with the family, particularly the ones that are talented, rather than just having them go out on their own. And I think this is one of the things that creating a business offers an opportunity for the family to work together and do beautiful things together rather than have everybody going out and taking different paths. And finally, the family that has wealth can do a wonderful thing, which is they can invest in the education and the mentoring and the development of the young people in their family in ways that other families cannot. They can teach them about business. They can learn about the business. They can learn from people in the business. And they can learn from listening to the family deal with their challenges. So what's the takeaway? What is it that you can do? The suggestion that I want to make is that families with kids growing up have a lot of opportunities, not to just have fun together and not to take vacations together, but to have some sort of a family meeting, to take some business ideas and bring them into the family and say, we're going to have a conversation about our business, what it means. We might talk about some of the challenges. We might talk about what you can expect for the future, or what we're going to do with our wealth. And we'll talk about values, talk about sustainability. We might talk about inheritance and what can you expect. So there are two examples I want to give you from families that I've worked with. One family, a successful entrepreneur, and he had 3 children, and one of them was a musician, and she had studied classical music, and then she got into rock and roll, and she is the leader of a very, very successful heavy metal band. Other daughter was an artist. Son wanted to go into financial services. So the family talked, and they said, well, what we're going to do is we have a commitment to create a new business for each member of our family. What we want and what we expect is that they will be doing the business not necessarily to make money, but it'll be something that's valuable, something that they're good at, and they can demonstrably say they're going to make a contribution, and something that other people are valuing in some way. So then they will create a business plan, and it might be a plan to invest in a business, but as in the case of the heavy metal rock, well, is that an investment for the family to make a profit, or is this art, or is this and supporting her to do this? The other daughter, who is a conceptual artist, the question is her art just in her head, even though she builds it, or is this something that other people will value? So the family will use its resources to create a entrepreneurial project or a social investment in the next generation. So the shift, and you're entrepreneurs, you have children. One of the things that I see in first to second generation families is you've got the evolution, you've got the paternalistic, and no matter how nice everybody here is, we have this way of being in control and dominating, if you're an entrepreneur, that is very, very important and successful, but you tend to have this attitude that you need to change if you want to be in your family, successful in developing the skills, talents, and energy. You want to create energy in your kids. You want to create excitement. You want them to develop their talents, not in an irresponsible way, but in a responsible way. You want to share the excitement. You want them to do something that they couldn't do if they didn't have the resources. So the family is a partnership with trust, engaged next generation, transparent, clear rules, and this is how you do it. If you want to start a business, you bring it to the family, you ask for funding. If you want to do something and you have an idea for the family, you can bring it to the family and we can discuss it. There's an exchange and a teamwork in the family that's a little bit different than being an entrepreneur, although many of you from your stories are very collaborative in your businesses. So in the end, what you're doing is you're not trying to limit what you give to the next generation, and somehow by limiting them and not giving them money, they're going to become responsible and use their wealth well. If you don't give them money, then they'll use it well. Isn't really a good learning strategy. You need to become engaged and let the next generation be your teachers. What we see in the successful families is that the second and third generation, instead of becoming basically spenders of the wealth, they use the wealth, but they see the wealth as with a stewardship perspective where they're passing it on to the next generation, and they're doing things that are taking the family in new ways and doing new things that are possible because of the wealth the family has created. So you have next generation family members. For example, a young man that I talked to, his family is a German family, makes wurst, sausage. And he's into looking at the food chain and sustainability, and he was talking with his father and saying, well, gee, there are other ways to make meat without using animals. Oh, really? And so he asked his father for permission to create a company out of their company, a subsidiary called Like Meat. And the idea is he would create vegetarian soy products that tasted as good as their meat products. And he actually made a bet with his father at what time, how many years it would take for that Like Meat to sell more and to be larger business than their original meat producer. And in return for that, he got mentoring from his father. He took a role in the meat company. He was active in that, and it was a kind of a both and. The way in which the next generation sees new possibilities, becomes family entrepreneurs, the way in which entrepreneurship and new ideas come in to the family, the way in which the family can take their wealth and through a foundation, through social entrepreneurship, even through redesigning the company, can take it in new directions, are all of the exciting possibilities of entrepreneurship inside the family. And I want you all, as your children are young and growing, to think about how it is we can use these principles and ideas to engage our kids to do the exciting things that they can do because you had the foresight and the creativity and the dedication to create the businesses that you created. Thank you.